These days, it's rare to see the mainstream media out of step with their progressive allies. That's why it's a bit entertaining to see NBC News twisting themselves into knots to try and side with the BLM activists, while at the same time telling them that Big Papa Joe and the federal prosecutors are going to make everything all right. Today, we'll be looking at this article by NBC News and analyzing it with the 5 sheet, where they are arguing primarily that the recent shooting of Ma'Khia Bryant, is most appropriately handled by a DOJ probe into the Columbus Police Department. Now, this is a little bit at odds with what most of these more radical protesters have been calling for. Because, in the wake of the George Floyd death, there were months and months of these mostly peaceful riots where they were calling for defunding the police departments, and even a nationally elected representative, Tlaib, was recently calling for no more police, no more incarceration. So a lot of people on the progressive side, a lot of prominent figures, are calling for much more radical action. And what that NBC News is arguing for in this article isn't even any immediate action. They're just calling for an investigation. Now, part of the reason they're doing this is because this recent shooting, all the people they interviewed in this, all the experts they interviewed, thought it was a justified shooting. Thought the officer had no choice when he showed up, and Bryant was attempting to stab another girl with a knife, and you don't have time in that situation to begin de-escalation procedures. You either take action to save that girl who's about to be stabbed, or you stand by and watch it. And that's what I've heard from other experts as well who've talked about it, and that's what they said here. So they had a bit of a hard time siding with some of the more radical people in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. There are people out there saying, these are just kids being kids. You didn't ever get in a school fight? Sometimes, who is it, Joy Reid? Said, like, heck, sometimes we had fights. They'll bring a little knife or something. I think she said, like, a little pen knife. And teachers were able to de-escalate those, no big whoop. Implying that the officer either should have done nothing or done some kind of de-escalation procedures. But, when he gets there, right as he arrives on scene, you can see the lady thrusting with the knife. There, as the experts quoted in this article, and every other expert I've seen talk about it, said there was no time. So let's run through the manipulative tactics they used in this article. Starting out with what you'd expect in any one of these stories, the undue emotion. Now, naturally, a story like this, a 16-year-old girl getting shot and dying, that's going to be a very emotional, very saddening story. There are responsible ways to report on that, and there are ways that amplify the emotionality, that take away the reader's ability to focus on the facts at hand and get them to focus on, we have to do something. This was so wrong. So this was one quote they did, which I believe was emblematic of the undue emotionality. Where's this guy? When you hold the mother of a dead child as they cry out for a kid that they will never see again, that never leads you. That quotes like that are not gonna help guide the reader towards a rational solution to a difficult problem. It's only going to do the opposite. It's going to fan the flames. And it's also going to lead to increased clicks and beep beep beep, If it bleeds, it leads. So that's obviously part of what they're doing here, but it's also feeding into the narrative. Okay, another one, the statistics lacking context. Statistics are one of the most easily manipulable pieces of data that you can ever use. So the one they used here was it black residents accounted for about half of all use of force incidents from 2015 to 2019, while only making up 28% of the city's population. Without any other context, I have no idea if that's a problem or not. How do those numbers correlate to poverty? How do they correlate to crime rates? How do they correlate to violent crime rates? What are the other factors we need to think about here? None of that is discussed. If you're gonna reasonably present statistics, they should be laid out with enough context that people on both sides of the aisle, even in today's politically divided world, can agree on at least what they mean. And you might have different interpretation, different places to go with your analysis, but you can agree on what they're saying. Or if the stats are too confusing for that, then you have some competent advocates on either side to argue with it. But they didn't do that. They just take this one cherry-picked thing that looks bad on its face, and given the bias of NBC News, you are pretty darn sure that that's going to be the most inflammatory number that they found out of a whole stack of statistics. All right. Another one is the straw man feigning ignorance, where, this was about the knife. So here they're doing a little bit of damage control. NBC, they've been taking a lot of heat over the past few days because they deceptively edited a phone call to the 911 call for this shooting and removed references to oh, she's got a knife, you have to get down here. And then they also edited the video, or it might have been a still from the video, to remove the knife to where you couldn't see it. So now in this article, they're bending over backwards to, they're not saying there's no knife, but they're going about as far as they can. Here's a couple examples. They described with an object in her right hand, and at one point said what appeared to be a knife, and said, police claimed to have found a knife on the ground. It's anyone who's watched the video, it's plain as day that it was a knife, and the cops recovered a knife on the scene. They're not going to come out and say they recovered that knife and then be like, oh, this was actually a banana. That is something they know they're going to get, they would get destroyed for. So this was, they're doing damage control here. They know they're getting their asses handed to them over the specific knife thing. So they're just trying to obfuscate, trying to muddy the waters a little bit on that point. Kind of standard manipulative tactics, but on that particular point, they had to really ramp it up because they're covering for themselves. All right. There were a couple other misleading points in tonality here and there, but the main tension in this article was between them wanting to side with the progressive BLM, do everything, demolish the institutions of our society, burn down the police department, while at the same time wanting to side with Joe Biden, the federal government will fix everything, sort of more standard democratic principles, and say yeah, let's just have a DOJ investigation. That'll come in and fix everything. So it was this difficult to argue, speaking out of both sides of their mouth piece. I found it a little bit entertaining. It's rare. There's something different about seeing the institutional powers backed into a corner, but at the end of the day, it's just the same old lies. All right, so if you want to fill out your own 5 sheet, just go to the website below. Or if you have any suggestions on how we can improve the process, leave a comment. I will be happy to take a look at that. Thanks a lot, guys.